Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This style of video is a first for me on this finance channel, and I'm going to be doing a book review on the psychology of money. So I read a lot of books, fiction, nonfiction, primarily nonfiction in my lifetime. However, I will say I don't read many finance books, and this is one of the first ones that I've read finance books, let me get that clear, but I don't typically read them just because I prefer to consume my financial content through podcasts, blog posts, and YouTube videos. So I find that the books that are out there are not really helpful, and it kind of would just be like a hobby read, if anything. However, ever since this came out, I've been wanting to read this book, so I did purchase it a few months ago, I'm not sure. And I also finished this book a couple of months ago, but I'm finally getting around to making the review on this because I do think it's a great book for anybody along their financial journey. It's entertaining, it's short, sweet, to the point, and definitely makes you think outside of the box a little bit. So again, this is called The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness by Morgan Housel, I'm not sure how to say his last name. I can go ahead and link this down below. I think it was like under 15 bucks on Amazon. I will start by saying that I do recommend it, and I did really enjoy this. I think I finished the book in about 2 weeks. I only read it before bed, really, and I think I finished it in about 2 weeks. So it is a fairly simple read. The words are not like terribly small or anything, and there's like 250 pages or so, not even. So I went through and, well, as I was reading, I tabbed a few pages. I always do that. Sometimes I'll highlight books if they're, if I'm keeping them. And I wanted to just read those things that I tabbed and give my thoughts on them. I honestly think reviewing books is kind of difficult in video format. So hopefully you guys like this, but I do recommend checking this book out. All right, this first part that I want to talk about comes from the first chapter, which is called No One's Crazy. And this part really stood out to me and made a lot of sense as to why he brought it up. So I'm going to read quite a bit of this, like a decent chunk, so just bear with me, okay? It was not until the 1980s that the idea that everyone deserves and should have a dignified retirement took hold. And the way to get that dignified retirement ever since has been an expectation that everyone will save and invest their own money. Let me reiterate how new this idea is. The 401k, the backbone savings vehicle of American retirement, did not exist until 1978. The Roth IRA was not born until 1998. If it were a person, it would be barely old enough to drink. It should surprise no one that many of us are bad at saving and investing for retirement. We're not crazy, we're all just newbies. Same goes for college. The share of Americans over age 25 with a bachelor's degree has gone from less than 1 in 20 in 1940 to 1 in 4 by 2015. The average college tuition over that time rose more than fourfold adjusted for inflation. Something so big and so important, hitting society so fast explains why, for example, so many people have made poor decisions with student loans over the last 20 years. There is not decades of accumulated experience to even attempt to learn from. We're winging it. Same for index funds, which are less than 50 years old, and hedge funds, which didn't take off until the last 25 years. Even widespread use of consumer debt, mortgages, credit cards, and car loans did not take off until after World War II, when the GI Bill made it easier for millions of Americans to borrow. Dogs were domesticated 10,000 years ago and still retain some behaviors of their wild ancestors. Yet here we are, with between 20 and 50 years of experience in the modern financial system, hoping to be perfectly acclimated. So I apologize, I know that was quite long. It was like a full page. This is on page 21, by the way, and I think that makes so much sense. Like we tend to get upset with ourselves. I know I do, especially when I think about how I should have been investing earlier. I should have been saving. I shouldn't have taken out so much student loans. And we don't know, I wasn't taught this. And this is also because for my parents, it was even more new, and they didn't know how things went. My dad wasn't even born in America. So it's like, all these things that we think we should have were not even implemented 50 years ago or, like 60 years ago. So it's pretty crazy to even see that. That's something I've never thought about. So when I read this, I immediately tabbed it. I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. It's just like with student loans. I have a friend who's about 10 years older than me, and He graduated from undergrad, grad school, including a PhD program with no student loan debt. And I remember asking him, like, how did you get through school without student loan debt? It wasn't, his parents didn't pay for it or anything like that. And he said that just wasn't a thing then. And he's just 10 years older than me. He said that just wasn't a thing then. Like, he was able to afford school because of the pricing, and that's just how it worked. Like, the scholarship that we have in the state of Georgia was able to cover the bulk of the cost of the school that he went to, the same school as me, and everything else was able to cover it. And then he was working, but the money he made was able to cover it. But then 10 years later for me, I was working multiple jobs. I had to take out student loans. I did have a scholarship, and it still didn't cover everything. So it was very interesting to think about and makes a lot of sense. So don't feel bad about where you stand right now. All right, this next little story comes from chapter 3 called Never Enough. And this was a story told by John Bogle, apparently. At a party given by a billionaire on Shelter Island, Kurt Vonnegut informs his pal Joseph Heller that their host, a hedge fund manager, had made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his wildly popular novel Catch-22 over its whole history. Heller responds, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." Enough. I was stunned by the simple eloquence of that word. Stunned for 2 reasons. First, because I have been given so much in my own life, and second, because Joseph Heller couldn't have been more accurate. For a critical element of our society, including many of the wealthiest and most powerful among us, there seems to be no limit today on what enough entails. And this is the trap of consumerism and just society in itself, because so many people will land a job that is making double the amount of money than they're typically used to, or they get promoted, whatever the case may be, and they inflate their lifestyle. So this is why you see lawyers who are making, obviously they take out a lot of student loan debt, same with doctors, they take out a lot of student loan debt, and then they make a lot of money, but they stay broke for their whole life basically, or decades really. But on the other hand, there are people who adopt a more minimalist lifestyle, or just reducing their consumerism, being okay with what they have and only purchasing the things that make them happy. And those are the people who fire and become financially independent in whatever sense that may be for them. Yeah, I think that's really important, because that's a big factor of becoming financially independent, unless you're making like $500,000 a year and you do live below your means. I think in today's society, it's so easy to see people buying new clothes and staying on trend and buying new cars, and you feel the pressure to do that as well. But it is really nice to feel like you have enough and be okay with that, and save your money instead of go and spend it to try and fit in with other people. In that same chapter, he goes on to say that few of us will ever have 100 million, as Gupta or Madoff did, but a measurable percentage of those reading this book will at some point in their life earn a salary or have a sum of money sufficient to cover every reasonable thing they need and a lot of what they want. If you're one of them, remember a few things. So he says, number 1, the hardest financial skill is getting the goalposts to stop moving. He does have a whole paragraph underneath that. I'm not going to read it, but so same thing I was just discussing. Once you get a higher job, you're probably going to be like, oh, I want this bigger house, or I want this car. And one of the ways to get to financial independence is to stop that inflation, that idea of inflation. Number 2, social comparison is the problem here. Again, exactly what I was talking about. You are seeing people on social media, you are seeing your peers around you, and even the pressure from your peers or your parents or anything like that. And a lot of people want to be just like that, or just feel the need to fit in. So it's the same thing. It is a problem, and you just gotta put blinders up to that and not care what other people think. Number 3, enough is not too little. And he goes on to say, enough is realizing that an insatiable appetite for more will push you to the point of regret. Very true. You're going to end up buying more than you need, and you're going to be in debt. You're going to be living paycheck to paycheck. Very good point. Number 4, there are many things never worth risking, no matter the potential gain. He goes on to say, reputation is invaluable, freedom and independence are invaluable, family and friends are invaluable, being loved by those who you want to love you is invaluable, happiness is invaluable, and your best shot at keeping these things is knowing when it's time to stop taking risks that might harm them, knowing when you have enough. All right, this next part I want to talk about comes from chapter 4 called Confounding Compounding. And he says applying the survival mindset to the real world comes down to appreciating 3 things. But one of those 3 things I highlighted, and that is planning is important, but the most important part of every plan is to plan on the plan, not going according to plan. And this is so true and something I've learned. I actually feel like I talk about this pretty frequently on this channel because I always I always am planning, and I talk about my goals. I talk about what I want to happen, but I make sure to clarify that these are just goals and I am not absolutely expecting this to happen, because I have learned way too often that things do not go to plan. And honestly, it's just crazy how life ends up working out. My current life, I did not plan this, I did not expect really any of this. I mean, I kind of shaped it to be this way, but a lot of this went out of plan. So I had way different goals and ideas of what would actually be happening once I graduated college. I definitely thought I would be further along at this point in my life. I had plans of being self-employed by 30, having $1 million by 30 when I was like a teenager. Yeah, there's just a lot of things. This is why I don't like to set goals that are too far away, or if I do set them, I don't put too much weight in them, if that makes sense, because that really leads to disappointment, and there's just no point of doing that to yourself. He goes on to say, if you're projecting your income, savings rate, and market returns over the next 20 years, think about all the big stuff that happened in the last 20 years that no one could have foreseen. September 11th, a housing boom and bust that caused nearly 10 million Americans to lose their homes, a financial crisis that caused almost 9 million to lose their jobs, a record-breaking stock market rally that ensued, and a coronavirus that shakes the world as I write this. When you look back on the last couple of decades, or just your life in general, just think about everything that has happened. It's wild. So that is very important. Do not, especially with finances, but just everything in life, really. Don't expect your plan to go according to plan. All right, this next one comes from chapter 14 called Youll Change. And I tabbed one thing in this section, and he says, we should also come to accept the reality of changing our minds. Some of the most miserable workers I've met are people who stay loyal to a career only because it's the field they picked when deciding on a college major at 18. When you accept the end of history illusion, you realize that the odds of picking a job when you're not old enough to drink that you will still enjoy when you're old enough to qualify for Social Security are low. The trick is to accept the reality of change and move on as soon as possible. This is huge, because I always think about the decisions that I was making at 17, 18 years old do not reflect anything about what I want now. I mean, some of it, I'm sure, but just to think back to 17-year-old me deciding to be a biology major because I wanted to be a dentist, and now I want nothing to do with dentistry. It's wild. You are going to change. You're going to want different things. So that is very important. You definitely do need to accept the reality of changing our minds and being okay with that, but also taking action on that so that you do not become miserable like what he was just explaining, because so many people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and you've got to take control and realize that you are not stuck and you can change your life in regards to finances, your career, or really anything else. All right, this one comes from chapter 20 called Confessions, and this is actually about him. He says, the psychology of my own money. And I thought this was interesting to read. I really like to see people's opinion on finances. That's why, I started this channel, and, how I got into finances myself. So he has one part in here where he talks about owning his house, paying off his house faster than you need to. And I thought this was important because it's kind of relevant to my student loans or paying off debt in general. And I may not necessarily agree exactly with what he's saying here in regards to his house, but this applies for my student loans, okay? The independent feeling I get from owning our house outright far exceeds the known financial gain I'd get from leveraging our assets with a cheap mortgage. Eliminating the monthly payment feels better than maximizing the long-term value of our assets. It makes me feel independent. I don't try to defend this decision to those pointing out its flaws or those who would never do the same. On paper, it's defenseless, but it works for us. We like it, that's what matters. Good decisions aren't always rational. At some point, you have to choose between being happy or being quote-unquote right. And then he goes on to explain a number of other things that he and his family does that is different from like what would be recommended in the financial community. And I really like that he did this. It shows his vulnerability, and I did agree with a lot of it. And it is important to highlight that personal finance is personal, and whatever it is that you're doing that feels right for you, feels best for you, is what you should be doing. Now, of course, people are going to see things as right versus wrong. Like, you probably shouldn't be spending thousands of dollars every month on just random shopping trips. But if you're making a decision based off of how you feel and what is right for you, and it's something that a lot of people are against or they disagree with, then it does not matter. It's kind of like me buying a house. I don't want to buy a house right now because I just don't want to. You can see that video that I filmed, and a lot of people still think you should buy a house right now, and that's fine. But for me, it is not right at the moment. I am choosing to pay down my student loans instead of invest the money, even though I know I would make a lot more money invested. But it gives me a greater peace of mind to be completely debt-free. Okay, this next part comes from it's like the postscript of the book. So it's just the ending of the book, and it says, "A brief history of why the US consumer thinks the way they do." I think this really highlights the difference in American finances back from how it was before the 2000s, or maybe even a little bit before that. But I think this applies more so for the older generation, and it's just something to think about. So here's what he says. Joe, an investment banker making $900,000 a year, buys a 4,000 square foot house with 2 Mercedes and sends 3 of his kids to Pepperdine. He can afford it. Peter, a bank branch manager making $80,000 a year, sees Joe and feels a subconscious sense of entitlement to live a similar lifestyle because Peter's parents believed and instilled in him that Americans' lifestyles weren't that different even if they had different jobs. His parents were right during their era because incomes fell into a tight distribution, but that was then. Peter lives in a different world, but his expectations haven't changed much from his parents, even if the facts have. So what does Peter do? He takes out a huge mortgage. He has a $45,000 credit card debt. He leases 2 cars. His kids will graduate with heavy student loans. He can't afford the stuff Joe can, but he's pushed to stretch for the same lifestyle. It is a big stretch. Times are very different these days, and I like that he brought that up because it applies to so many other things too. So millennials, like myself, get a bad rep, I feel, in regards to how we live, like not buying a house, not having a family, not having children, blah, blah, blah. But times are so different, and there is a big gap between what some millennials make versus what others make versus how things were back in the day. Housing is more expensive, schooling is more expensive, everything is more expensive compared to our salaries. I think a lot of times older generations don't understand that. So I really appreciated the fact that he brought something like that up. If you are a millennial or younger than me or around the same age as me, then you've probably kind of dealt with that when it comes to your parents, and they kind of expect things from you that they did at their age, but it's just not the same. Those are the main points that I wanted to touch on in this book. I do, like I said, suggest that you pick it up. It's a really good read. It's a simple read, and you'll finish it pretty quickly. Comment down below if you have read this before and your thoughts on it. And please also comment down below any of your favorite financial books. I will start reading them. I just don't read them very often, but eventually I'll probably get more into it. I just feel like I know a lot of the information from other means of consumption, but I'm down to read a good book. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts, and please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one.